Joining me on this episode of the Neil Wilkins podcast, I'm really delighted to welcome Bert terHart. Now, Bert is a self-described soldier, sailor, scientist, adventurer, solo serial entrepreneur and author. I mean, my goodness, what a lot of accolades there. He's fellow of the Royal Canadian Geographical Society and an explorer. And this is one thing I think we want to go deep into. Bert has actually sailed non-stop solo around the world amongst a whole host of other journeys that he's taken to follow in the wake of some of the world's greatest explorers and cartographers. The list really is quite endless, and we're going to focus in on some of the things and the learnings that Bert has experienced and enjoyed through his various travels, both professionally, academically, because he's a very, very well qualified human being, as well as his journeys through the oceans and really kind of exploring what the oceans, amongst other things in his life, have actually taught him and then can obviously benefit us. Bert, welcome to the show.
Neil, it's wonderful to be with you, and I just found out you're in Bristol, so my heart is just glowing, knowing that you're from that place because as far as mariners are concerned, it's one of the places, and every time I hear something in my biography, I want to look over my shoulder and see who you're talking about because it just doesn't see me. But yeah, so be it. We'll have lots to talk about it. I'm really excited to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, it's interesting, that thing about the maritime history, isn't it? Because
Mm.
I guess a lot of us are kind of driven by the past. We see nostalgia, we see, kind of things unraveling sort of in the past, and we think, oh, that looked exciting, or that looks something I want to experience. I mean, it is that kind of sort of historical element, because certainly from your biography, it feels like the historical element is one of those sort of innate drivers in you.
Yeah, I think that would be very accurate. And one of the things there's always those bits of history that aren't necessarily glossed over, but we aren't necessarily focused on. And a really good example of that is Sir Joseph Banks, who was with Cook's first first trip. And Joseph Banks, as you probably know, ended up eventually as president of the Royal Society of London for close to 40 years and was a remarkable individual in every way, shape, and form. And an unbelievably good scientist of all the crazy things. An aristocrat. He was very wealthy. He actually paid his way around the world with Cook. But if it hadn't been for Joseph Banks and his endeavors and his input to Cook's expeditions, and then every expedition that the Admiralty launched afterwards, because they all went with botanists, they all went with naturalists, they went with people whose jobs it was simply to record as best they could everything that they came across in unbelievably uh, painstaking and competent detail, and that impetus from the Admiralty translated into explorations across Canada. David Thompson was a remarkable botanist in his own right, even though he was a surveyor and a cartographer. So there's always these bits of history that are that people that ride along with guys like Cook and guys like Thompson and Fiddler Mackenzie. The list goes on and on. So there's history in that context has been a driver of mine, because there's always, if you're willing to turn the page and look at a little bit sideways and see the writing, between the writing, there's no end to things that should, I think, be inspiring us to greater and more interesting heights.
So, but for you though, Bert, I mean, I guess there's something in the DNA as well, because
Yeah.
a lot of us can hear stories like that and sort of, marvel at, those great explorers and, the naturalists and, who've kind of profoundly shaped really the world that we live in right now. But there's got to be something that takes you as one of the kind of the real true explorers, those numerous steps beyond most of us who sort of sit there basking in it and think, wow, yeah, it's great, and then just carry on with day-to-day life. You must have something in your DNA that says, I've got to do something about this too. I've got to get out there, and then feel this pull. Is it like a pull? Do you feel a draw
Yeah.
towards doing this?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. There's something in your DNA that does that. Every person I've met that's of my ilk, in that sense, in the exploration sense, there's something that pulls them. And in my academic career, it was the same thing. There was people who would just who were just pulled in some inexorable way to become absolute experts in some of the, I won't say mundane fields, but things that that wouldn't necessarily interest you, like littoral transport, which is the something that was part and parcel of my PhD, but as an adjunct. But littoral transport is the sideshore transport of soils in lakes and seashores, and of course it's wildly important. But who would think of it, right? And then who would spend their whole life focused on that? But there isn't anything that you and I can be passionate about, whether it's surfing, or whether it's gardening, or whether it's you name it. There's a scientist somewhere who's dying for data about that very particular topic. So that idea of contributing to the global knowledge base is a pull that's in me, and I've seen that in other people. The idea of of traipsing along in the wakes and the footsteps of other great explorers and cartographers is a pull I see in other people that want to climb mountains. I mean, it's not as if Everest has never been climbed before, but people still want to go there and do it. So it's it's in. And I know for me specifically, my father was this. He'd sailed around the world with the Dutch Merchant Marine, so had been his grandfather, or his father, my grandfather was in the Dutch Merchant Marine. Same thing on my mother's side. So it's I'm definitely swimming in the deep end of that particular gene pool, as it were. Uh, so you're right. It's a calling, and who knows. It's certainly embedded deep within, and sometimes it's a voice that you just can't say no to, even though some of the things you might be thinking about aren't all that smart. It would seem from the outside looking in.
You make an interesting point there, Bert, in terms of this thing about almost, I'm going to paraphrase you here, but this thing about the greater good, kind of be on an expedition,
Mm,
be doing the science, be exploring, be adventuring, whatever term you want to sort of use here, but actually be doing it not necessarily just for self. I mean, although I want to come on to some of the kind of the things that have been, really, I guess, quite profound for you on these journeys. But
hmm
for a lot of people, I think doing this, let's call it properly, it is because they are passionate about the science. They're looking to
Yeah,
be curious and uncover
yeah,
things, not just for themselves, but for this greater good. Now, that's a
yeah.
different way of looking at this, isn't it? Because
Oh, yeah,
most people will be thinking, oh, it's all about the ego of the individual. They
yeah,
just want to be able to say that they have done X. But it's
yeah.
more than that, isn't it?
Oh, it has to be more than that. If you were in it just for yourself, and you choose to do something that's hard, that you will burn up that particular why in the first couple of days, and then you'll be looking for the why to do it, and it won't be there, and you'll go home. There, it is just. I don't honestly. I don't care how big your ego is. It is not big enough to drive you around the world. It's not big enough to. It's not big enough for you to endure the hardships that are required to do. Um, that you will inevitably face if you choose to do something that's a little bit outside the ordinary. So you're absolutely right about that, and it's true in a historical context as well. I mean, again, Cook sailed from Bristol. We'll talk about Cook. Everyone, and of course, lots of people sailed from Bristol, but in no way, shape, or form can you say that Cook did it to literally put his name on the map. There is just no way. He was one of the. Uh, if you read his journals, you'll read how unbelievably humble he was, and um, the people that choose to do it for reasons other than that, it's not a strong enough why. It just is not. And I've run across all kinds of people who, I mean, every sailboat that you see tied up in every marina, just about every skipper or captain of those boats is going to disappear over the horizon and sail around the world. And the vast majority of them never do it. And one of the reasons is, I'm not saying that you have to do it by any stretch of imagination. Actually, I'm saying that you don't need to, Mike, because my idea of what's an adventure and what's extraordinary is probably wildly different than what you might think. But it's most of those boats don't go anywhere because it's not that I'm doing it just for me is not a big enough why to actually let them even untie from the dock.
So this, I need to go there now because you've just given me a little hook there, Bert,
Yeah,
which is it might be wildly different than you think. So,
yeah.
so what is it then? What is the reason?
Well, I think as I've alluded to, you have to have very many reasons why. But this whole idea of going on an adventure is scale invariant. I mean, think of this when you were a small child. As soon as you walked out the front door and closed the door behind you, you were going to be walking on Mars. You were going to be, you're going to be scoring the winning goal. You were going to be playing for, Leeds United. And as soon as you closed the door, and as soon as you open the door and walk back in, that whole world just collapsed into something else again. And we lose sight of that. So my point is that as soon as you step out your front door, and if you do that with an open heart and an open mind, then the journey that you are going to go on is going to be transformative in ways that you cannot possibly imagine. Because I mean, and the way that I like to think of it is simply this: if you look at the word extraordinary, it's extraordinary, and extra doesn't have to be the size of the distance between here and the moon. It can just be one single step outside of ordinary. So you take one single step outside the box, and you are by definition extraordinary. And I would challenge anyone to step outside their front door and not look at a tree or a blade of grass or a flower, and not be gobsmacked by the miracle of it all. And which isn't to say that you have to fall on your hands and knees and start worshiping nature by any stretch of the imagination. But my point is that we're surrounded by these miracles, large and small, if we just simply choose to look at them. And any adventure any adventure that you undertake can be transformative. Anything. Who am I to say that you have to do this in order to have that experience? It's hard enough for me to understand what goes on in the 4.5 inches between my own two ears, let alone what it might be for someone else. It's simply a matter of stepping outside what might be ordinary for you, and then doing that with even maybe think of it of a different way. That in every place I've been, in all the wild corners of the world, no matter how I've gotten there, the people that I've met along the way do two things. One, they erase all the hardships that I've encountered in getting there. They just turn them to dust immediately. And secondly, their stories are absolutely humbling and motivating and inspirational. So, and you would never know you would never know what they would be without asking, without actually having got there in some way, shape, or form, or without having quite literally the eyes and the ears, to hear and listen to those people, and some of the history that surrounds those places. I mean, I'm still thinking of Bristol, and I'm just thinking what an amazing place that has to be, just because of the history that's lying literally at your feet on the sidewalks as you might walk down to basically any of those places. And um, I'm struck by that here in Canada, because here in Canada where I live, I can sail to those places where Cook actually walked on the beach, look at exactly the same trees because they were there when he was there. The paths are literally worn into stone, so it would be those same footsteps, and nothing has changed. And in places like Bristol, where these famous people were, I could say the same thing in a different context, because it's not actually the raw natural context that we have here, but it would be the same thing. But you have to be able to recognize that, to actually stop and think and go, oh yeah, this place is pretty cool. Think of that.
Feels like you're tapping into some kind of flow here. But when you kind of describe that, it feels like, you're stepping onto the same beach. Okay, time
Yeah,
has elapsed, but it is still there. It's almost a little snapshot in time. There's something about the flow of the way you describe this. Is that kind of how it feels? It's almost like you have to get into that sort of jet stream, as it were, and then you
yeah,
can just flow with it, rather than just, I'm going to power on through this. It
yeah,
feels a lot more, yeah, kind of in tune than
yeah,
actually trying to resist something. Is that
yeah.
right?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. I never sailed around the world. I snuck around the world before Mother Nature had a chance to realize that I was dumb enough to be out there and teach me a proper lesson. So the the idea of, well, that's literally how that's literally and figuratively how I got started here on the coast, because of course, George Vancouver mapped this entire coast. You might know that, or perhaps not, that his expedition was his survey expedition that lasted for 3.5 years, surveyed everything from Baja California all the way up to Prince William Sound. It was the longest expedition that the Admiralty had ever mounted. It was probably the most successful one because of how unbelievably difficult that job was, and how he managed to do it despite everything that despite everything that not just Mother Nature pitched at him, but everything that the Admiralty and then his subsequent trials and tribulations afterwards did. So, but I live in a place, and it's Vancouver Island, near the city of Vancouver. Um, everything has got his stamp and name on it, so you simply cannot escape it. And if it doesn't take, it's not hard to try to. Well, I guess the adage is, if you want to know something about someone, you walk a mile in their footsteps. So how about 4,000? How about I walk 4,000 miles in those footsteps and see what that might be like? And this flow that you're talking about is simply trying to step into their shoes, have a little bit of an appreciation of what their life, what it might have looked like, despite how difficult that is, because of course the clothing is different, the food, the boat, everything is different. But you can attempt to follow along in things that they had done, like using a sextant, for example. That's how I went around the world. I didn't use any electronic navigation whatsoever. Paddling across Canada, I didn't use any electronic navigation at all, just maps that I had made in a compass and a pencil. And you can get a very quick and deep appreciation for firstly how unbelievably hard it is, and more importantly, how unbelievably good at their jobs these people were. How just amazing, just absolutely stunning at how good they were at what they did. And I've been fortunate in my life to be around very highly functioning people, whether it's in the service, the Canadian Army. I was in the Canadian Special Service Force, or whether it's in business with people who have made vast success of their lives in terms of business people, and then in terms of people who've done extraordinary things when it comes to sailing or other types of exploring. And there's this thread of incredible competence and the ability to function at a very high level, under almost any circumstance you can imagine. And that thread, we think of ourselves as technologically competent, for example. But I can assure you that the Inuit, for example, living in northern Canada, their ability to clothe themselves, to technically come up with clothing that you could live, love, and thrive in the Arctic, is vastly superior to anything that we can do today. So technologically, they were way more advanced than us, and yet they were a Stone Age culture. So it's shocking, and I don't know how you can't step outside of the natural world and be astounded by that. I mean, quite literally, these people put Canada on the map. As an example, people sailing out of Bristol put Canada on the map. So yeah, it's there's these amazing there's these amazing threads that bind us all together. These rivers, that you've alluded to, that are flowing through time and circumstance, that have not only shaped the countries and cultures that we live in, but quite literally, the manner in which we live in them.
So the way that you're describing a lot of these moments in time and these expeditions, these great ventures, is that these are big, big things. I'm going to use the
Yeah.
word big. I mean, they're massive things. And yet the way that you're describing these people who are able to do it, be either in business, in academia, in science, in adventure traveling, exploring, they all seem to, by the sounds of the way you're describing them, they all seem to be very conscious of self. They have a almost like this innate understanding of how they fit within that
Hmm.
environment. Because I think for a lot of us hearing these stories, you'd think, "Oh my goodness, I could never do something like that. It's way too big." But I don't think these people, and probably, well, I want to go and sort of find out whether Bert's the same as this one, is that actually, if you attend to yourself, then nothing is too big, because all you're looking at is what you can see around you and taking that next step.
Okay,
Is that right? Because
yeah,
otherwise, this thing could be just too daunting, couldn't it? Some of
yeah,
the journeys that you've taken could just be too big in isolation
yeah,
if you don't really focus on self.
yeah. You've hit the nail on the head, like almost like no one else, which is in which is a real. I mean that in the most sincere way that I could possibly articulate or convey that. You are absolutely right. Firstly, you have to be completely and utterly embedded in the moment and divorced or divorced in every way, shape, and form from the outcome, because the outcome is just too wild. It's just way too out there. So you can imagine that you're in a small boat at sea. The nearest person to you is 2,200 miles that way in the International Space Station. You're deep in the South Indian Ocean, so you're 1,000 miles south, 2,000 miles south of India, 2,000 miles southeast of the bottom of Africa, and a long way from Australia, and you're not even halfway. I'm not even halfway home. I have another 18,000 miles to go, say, or say I have another 15,000 miles to go. Well, that's impossible to sail 15. It's literally, to put your mind to it. If you're sailing at 4 miles an hour, which is basically a quick walk, how am I going to sail the next 15,000? Because I'm just barely hanging on by my fingernails. Literally, I'm just barely hanging on. The boat is mostly underwater. The storms are just one after the other. How can you possibly do it? Well, the only thing that you can focus on is the now, and the immediacy of now. And if you remove yourself from that, then you probably won't see tomorrow, quite literally, because Mother Nature just will not stand you being in anything other than the moment. And that all sounds ever so. It's like Eckhart Tolle had written that in the Power of Now, but it's absolutely true. And we live in a world where it's almost impossible to scrub all the trappings of civilization from us, because we're walking around with our cell phone. I'm wearing glasses. Take my glasses off. I can't see too much, if it's up too close. So it's very, it's, I mean, maybe that's a poor example, but we have computers, like cell phones. We have everything that tends to pull us out of the now into something, into some other externality. And you can't do that. You can't do that climbing a mountain. You can't do that in the middle of the ocean. You can't do it if you're flying a jet. If you're a Navy pilot about to land on an aircraft carrier in the middle of the night, you better be embedded in the now, because if you're not, you're going to be a casualty. You'll be one of those numbers on a wall somewhere. And you know at the bottom of your heart that anyone else who's ever been in that situation, in that place, whether it's in the wilds of the northern boreal forest of Canada, or the bottom of the South Indian Ocean, they have done exactly the same thing to survive. So you are immediately bound to those people in that way, because the experience is utterly the same in every way, shape, and form. Context might be different, because it might be wearing Gore-Tex as opposed to an oilskin, but the point is exactly the same. You're just utterly embedded in now. And all you can do, I can't think of sailing the next 15,000 miles, but I can think of sailing the next hour or the next 10 minutes. I can think of, okay, I can steer the boat for 10 minutes so I can understand what's going on. And then I can get everything organized so the boat can look after itself in some way, shape, and form. But I can do that. And if I keep doing that, I will quite literally sail around the world and at not much more than a quick walk. It's how you get to the top of Everest. There's only really two technical parts of Everest. There's the Khumbu Ice Falls, and then there's if you're on the southeast route, the traditional route, and then it's the Hillary Step. Both of them are all roped up, and everything before and after that is simply nothing. It's just a walk. You're just walking. Each step might be the most excruciatingly difficult step that you take, but it's nothing more than a really stiff walk. But if you're at the bottom of base camp, looking up at the top, you're thinking, there's no way. It is impossible. How am I going to hoist this? How am I going to get this frail sack of flesh to 30,000 feet? It's just not going to happen. But I can take the next step. If you keep doing that, eventually you'll actually get to the top. So the words that you used earlier, which is just step by step, it's utterly true. And it's trite. Like the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. It just sounds so simple. It just sounds so simplistic, and it is. And it's been around for thousands of years, because number one, it's simplistic, and number two, it's utterly true in whatever context. In whatever context, I mean, even in business, if I had to say to you, okay, this month, Bert, we've got this month, Bert, the goal is $2.5 million in monthly recurring revenue. Well, that seems like a lot of money. How about we worry about getting the next client? Just one. Let's focus on getting one. Let's just do that. Let's live in that particular now. If you keep doing that, eventually there isn't a goal that you can't possibly knock off.
I'm hoping that quite a lot of people in this moment listening to that will think, that's exciting
Yeah.
because it's so achievable for
Yes.
everybody in every walk of life, in
Yeah.
every situation, no matter whether
Every
you feel yourself successful, like you've made it, or if you're absolutely at the bottom of the deepest pit, emotionally, and your well-being's really that one little next step. And that's so achievable for everybody,
yeah.
isn't it? We
Absolutely.
talk ourselves out of it, don't we, as humanity? We self-destruct by the fact that we just, oh, I can't do that. It's too much of a challenge. It's too big. But that next step isn't, is it
Yeah.
at all?
Well, there's a really interesting way to look at that. There is this voice inside your head, my head, everyone's head, that never shuts up and never quits, and it'll be with you until your last dying breath. And that voice only exists to say no. No, you can't. It's too far. It's too hard. It's too expensive. You're too tall. You're too short. It's too windy. It's too sunny. The list goes. It's endless, and it'll have a million excuses, none of which make any sense. But at times, it's pretty much the loudest voice that you have. And if all you need to do is give yourself permission to say yes, you and I can't give it to you, and only you can find it. And the beauty of it all is that the voice inside your head that you just alluded to, that always wants to say no, is as dumb as a bag of hammers. And you simply have to give it a choice that it can't differentiate between saying no and saying yes. And an example of that would be, well, let's say I want to get fit. I have a big expedition coming along, and I have to get off the couch and stop watching Netflix. So, and it's hard. Like it's hard for everyone. Everyone lives. Leonardo da Vinci on his deathbed exclaimed, or is exclaimed, that he had fallen short of the gifts God had given him because his work was not up to the standard with which God might have demanded given his talent. Leonardo da Vinci. And that's like Paul Dirac said exactly the same thing on his deathbed. I've fallen short of the gifts God has given me. One of the greatest artists the world has ever seen, and one of the greatest physics minds the world has ever seen, Paul Dirac. And I mean, those people, they lived their entire life with that voice playing inside their head. On their deathbed, they were claiming the same thing. So it's never going away. So here's how you live with it. You just give it a choice that it can't differentiate between saying yes and saying no. So if I want to get up and get fit, the first thing I have to do is sit up and stand up off the couch. And the voice inside your head will say, well, sitting up and watching TV or just standing up what's the difference between that and lying down? I don't care. Do it. Who cares? Go ahead. It'll never work out. Fine, whatever, do it. So you stand up. And the voice doesn't know. It can't differentiate between standing up and sitting down because what's the difference of that? And then so it shuts up. And then you go, okay, I'm standing up now. Now what do I do? Well, you walk to the door. And the voice inside your head will say, well, okay, fine, go to the door. Big deal. What's that going to prove? Then you go to the door. Then you say, well, you look around and you open the door. Because the voice goes, well, open the door. Who cares? Anyone can open a door. Go ahead, Bert. Even you can open a door. So you open the door. So you just and I've done that trick in business when I'm just absolutely nailed to, it seems literally nailed to the figuratively nailed to the couch because I'm not sure which way to go. I've done it when it's to get outside the boat when I know I have to go outside and do something to save my life, quite literally, because it'll take me 20 it would take typically an hour to get dressed just to get outside to start to do something constructive. And I knew I had to be outside, but I'm safe inside. So why would I leave the safety, the relative safety and comfort of the inside of the boat to go risk my life outside the boat? Because I have to, right? But then I have to tell myself I need to do that because your voice inside your head is saying, stay inside. Why would you go outside? It's stupid. You're just going to kill yourself. Stay here. You're safe. Don't. You're fine. You're good. Things will be better. Stop. But I would say I'm going to sit up because I would have to literally unstrap myself from my bed. I would have or bunk. I would have to pull the lee cloths back, and I would have to sit there and holding myself with on 4 points so that I could actually walk to or make my way to that part of the cabin where I could put my boots on, which would take 20 minutes, quite literally. And I would say, well, I'm sitting up. I may as well just make my way to the doorway where I can potentially stand. And the voice inside your head says, okay, well, go there. What difference does that make? So and the interesting part about that again is that if you reduce what you have to do to some very, very, very simple choice, then the harder those two choices will always point you in the right direction. So if you want to get fit, for example, the harder choice is always to sit up and do something as opposed to lie down and watch Netflix. If I want to save my life at sea, the harder of two choices is to go outside rather than is to remain strapped to my bunk. If you want to, if you want to, if you want to fly a rocket to to Mars like Elon Musk, then the harder thing is to blow up a few on the way there and hit and watch them explode. So there's firstly, I think there's a moral imperative to doing the hard things, and secondly, it gives you some directionality as to which way you should be headed. And it sounds unbelievably trite. If I want to get to the top of Everest, the next step just has to be uphill, which needs to be harder, right? Than the next step, which would be downhill, which is headed the opposite direction. So it's an interesting way to look at the world, and it's an interesting way to silence a little the imposter that lives in all of us.
And once you do it, I'm guessing, and I'm just sensing the passion with which you tell these stories, Bert, because it feels like once you've opened that almost Pandora's box there, it's
Mhm.
like you can't unknow this stuff. Are you
Yeah.
addicted to this? Because it feels so fully immersive. Once you kind of do this stuff and you know this stuff, it feels almost addictive in a
Well,
good way.
yeah. It's addictive in that it's unbelievably powerful. So as an example, um, to paddle one day would be usually around 30,000 canoe strokes. So that's 30,000 because you're in the canoe. If you want to get all the way across the continent in a single season, you've got to be pretty. You have to be pretty motivated, to get out and do it every day. But if I told you today, Bert, you're going to do 30,000 canoe strokes, you just roll your eyes and want to go back and want to lay down again. But if I can get myself out of the tent and into the canoe and just take one stroke, it's like, okay, well, then I can do that. You just keep doing it. And eventually you'll paddle across the country. I mean, how do you think that, David Thompson, this remarkable, probably the world's best surveyor, bar none, how do you think he did? How do you think he walked 90,000 kilometers across the face of North America, mapping everything from the Missouri River Basin all the way to the Columbia River and to Lake Athabasca? And how did he do that? How did he survey? He surveyed most of the Canadian-U.S. border when he was 65 years old. How did he do that? One step. Shockingly, if you read his journals, it's one step at a time. That's all he ever was focused on. But the next step. So it's an unbelievably powerful way to get things done. And again, I guess not to belabor a point, it's how the United States got to the moon when the technology didn't exist to get to the moon. If they just took it they were unbelievably good at taking the next step, the next important step, no matter how hard that step might be. They just kept doing it until they got there. And even today, it seems it's almost impossible to put a man on the moon. I mean, China keeps doing it or keeps trying. They haven't done it. Russia hasn't been able to do it. The United States can't do it, even given NASA in its current configuration cannot possibly do it because somehow this idea of that is kind of, I won't say lost, but maybe it's gone out of favor. But hats off again to another Elon Musk rocket analogy because he's certainly willing to embrace that, where we're just going to keep taking the necessary steps, even if it adds up to 17,335,632. We'll just keep taking them, and eventually you'll get there. You just cannot help yourself. You just can't help it. It's just going to happen.
So what are the next steps for Bert then? Because I cannot believe that there are no pre-planned steps that are
Yeah.
coming, because it just feels like, okay, there's another one on the offering here.
Yeah. Well, in May. I'm going to follow along in Franklin's steps to the Arctic Ocean from
Wow.
Rocky Mountain House. Now he didn't start in Rocky Mountain House, but he was. I'll be on those rivers and lakes and river systems that he was on. So Franklin had three expeditions to the Arctic. The ill-fated maritime expedition is one that everyone's aware of, but he had two overland expeditions. The first one was ended in some very ended in tragically in every way that you could imagine. But the second one was wildly successful. He surveyed a good chunk of the Arctic coast looking for the Northwest Passage, and it was based on his success of the successes of the first and certainly the successes of the second that he was given the command of the third maritime expedition. And he was as much a surveyor as he was a mariner. Again, a remarkably accomplished man. And the person who eventually found him and finished that survey was John Ray. So I'm off this summer to paddle and walk in the footsteps of those two great men who put the Northwest Passage on the map, something that's becoming of real geopolitical importance these days as the Arctic changes, and people's relation with the Arctic changes because it's more in the news. Let's say as a simple way of putting it, but again, both these people were shockingly good at what they did, and if it hadn't been for their efforts, Canada would likely be a very different place. And I'm off to do the 5,000 kilometer trip in a canoe this summer, and then so that's the summer. We'll stop it this summer.
Because you've got to remember, it's just that next step. That's a big step, right?
Yeah.
Yes, big series of steps. But how exciting! This is incredible, and I get a sense that this is literally a lifelong journey for you. You're not going to stop there, even if the next journey after that might be a shorter one. I mean, it doesn't really matter, does it? The scale
No.
of this, it feels that
No.
yes, you can have these, lifetime dreams to do one big, giant, massive exploration, or you can just literally think, today I'm just going to explore that park, or I'm just going to go and do this in my work, and that's also enough, isn't it?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And that's always my message. My message is to, if I choosing to do these big things, if you will, might give me a bit of a platform, but the message from that platform is all the same. It's absolutely, you simply need to step outside your front door. And if that journey is the grand total of it all is 14 steps, then that's 14 steps. And I think that is more than sufficient. Because I could travel across a continent with my blinders on and not learn a thing. And I could continue around the world and learn even less, not just about myself, but about the paths that I'm on, the people that I'm crossing, that I've come into contact with. I could learn absolutely nothing, and it would be it. And that's entirely possible. That's I would say how most people manage to travel around the world. It's like it's like me showing up in a cruise ship in Bristol, and I'm ferried off the cruise ship with 10,000 other people, and the farther the closest I get to the maritime history or the history of that particular neck of the woods and all the people is the gift shop, and then I turn around and get back in the boat. I can't say that. I mean, it's still an adventure, of course, but there's other ways to travel, and I think if you choose to travel with an open heart and an open mind, then I think that journey will be transformative. That's exactly, if you read Joseph Campbell or know who Joseph Campbell is, that's exactly, I think, what he would say if you read something of the Hero of a Thousand Faces or the history of mythology across all of that transcends cultures and societies.
Wow. I mean, if anybody listening to this is not inspired to go and take a step in any shape or form, in any direction, then I don't know what they really do need to wake up. I'm certainly planning to.
Well, I think so. I'm not young, right? I'm 66 years old. So I have every reason in the world not to do it. Certainly, I have no reason in the world to get in a canoe and paddle for 5,000 kilometers when and most people aren't necessarily thinking of that. And I'm doing it as a way to say, because your age doesn't matter. It simply doesn't matter, because you can be the ripe old age that I am. You can be a proper senior citizen. I get the senior discount on the ferry if I ask for it, although I have to produce documentation because no one wants to believe it, and it's irrelevant. You just have to find you simply have to give your permission. You just have to give yourself permission to say yes, I'll do it, and then the you know the manner in which that will, I hate to use the word manifest, but the way that will materialize in your world is gonna it's just gonna be there. Whether it doesn't, I'm not, I'm completely self-funded. I don't require any money from anybody else to do it. I do that when I was a scientist. I was infamous for doing science on a shoestring because scientists are always scrabbling around for money, and I just said, okay, well, there's just a way to get it done. Let's just do it. So age is no barrier. Money should not be a barrier, because it's not too expensive to just close the front door behind you, take a couple of steps outside, in a direction of your dreams, big or small.
Mm. So go do it, people. And if you want to follow Bert's travels, and I'm certainly going to be keeping a watch on this next one because this sounds absolutely fascinating. How do people get in contact with you? How do people follow your journey and your next adventure?
Well, if you went to terHart.com, then the threads that go out from that site, they'll take you to social media, they'll take you to the blogs or the things that I've written, they'll take you to my business ventures. That's probably the easiest and best way. And I have a rule where if you have the courage to email me, then I will email you back. And I say that to everyone everywhere. And I've had thousands of kids follow me on some of these trips, and they love to email me. So I say that I'm perhaps smiling because I still have emails to write to kids who are who because kids ask the greatest questions. One of the books I wrote, actually, every chapter heading is simply one of the questions that the kids ask me. So yeah, I'd love to hear from anyone everywhere, and there might be something that you've listened to now, or something that you come across that I've done that resonates with you, and it'd be a real pleasure and honor, actually, and I mean that sincerely, to be able to shed some light on that for you if you choose to email me. So there you go.
There's an
It's an open
invitation.
invitation.
It is. It's great. Oh, what have you opened up here?
Yeah, I
Well,
know.
it sounds like just a few more because
Yeah, it's just a
clearly
few more.
you've obviously you've done this yes, for a long time now. But this has been an absolutely incredible conversation. I've really enjoyed it, and yeah, you've just really, I think, got us all thinking about the possibilities. And I think that's what we can all hope for. And it is hope, isn't it? Hope for the possibility that today, this next moment, this next kind of ability to, seize life and, kind of really do something with it is available to us all. And that's a very simple but really profound message. So, Bert, thank you so much for your time.
Well, no, thank you, Neil. And I don't think I could have said that better. So it's been a real pleasure, and it's been a real treat to speak with you. And I look forward to seeing you in Bristol. That would be a thrill for me.